everybody, and welcome along to a brand new video today where we're continuing the Series 11 rewatch, where we're going back sort of a year or so on from each of the episodes, taking a look back at what I think about them now, a year on, given the kind of mixed reaction at the time, shall we say, and continuing really mixed reaction. I thought it's a good opportunity to reevaluate it and see, actually, are they any good? So today we reached part 3 of this series of videos where I've been taking 2 episodes at a time. This week it means we're getting to the Suranga Conundrum and Demons of the Punjab. For many I'd say they're quite contrasting episodes, both in the style of episode, the content of the episodes, and in terms of the quality as well probably, but well, we'll get into that in a second. So yes, by this point we've reached the middle part of the series, episodes 5 and 6, right sort of slap bang in the middle really, either side of it. So we've sort of had enough time for all the main characters to establish themselves in the series, and the opportunity to, in theory, kind of stretch it a little bit more, do a few more creative things with the programme, push the boundaries a bit further now the cast are all settled in. Unfortunately, we come to the Suranga Conundrum first, where that doesn't really happen. The Suranga Conundrum is probably what you would term a pretty bog-standard base under siege Doctor Who story. There's really not a lot more to it than that. Obviously, the base under siege idea for Doctor Who works really, really well. There's been many classic base under siege story over the whole 50 years of the programme, particularly obviously in the Troughton era when it really became a common theme. But yeah, throughout all the eras of Doctor Who, we've always had base under siege stories, and generally they've been done pretty well. It's probably a bit difficult at this stage to write something that's that original, but follows those sort of tropes. But there are still some good stories more recently. I think of like Under the Lake and Before the Flood. That was a pretty good essentially base under siege story. But unfortunately the Suranga Conundrum doesn't really live up to that in the same way, I think. Now, some people at the time called this episode like the worst Doctor Who episode ever, worse than Love and Monsters, worse than Time Lash or The Twin Dilemma, like absolutely awful. I don't particularly agree with that. Like, I don't think it's a great story. Like, it's not particularly creative, it's not massively exciting, it's not really got anything particularly great going for it, but it's not like it's offensively bad or has done anything particularly wrong that's going to make you want to hate it as a story. It's just so average, I think is the best way I can put it. So yes, obviously Vogue uses the base under siege storyline on sort of a medical spaceship essentially that the Doctor and co get transported onto when they get blown up by some sonic mine type thing on some weird planet. It was all a bit bizarre, that opening. I don't really know quite what that was. I guess it just kind of set up the rest of the story really, and getting them onto the Suranga place, the med spaceship. And from there, we obviously get the Pating, which is the main, you can't really call it villain, the monster, the alien of the episode that is basically just wanting to feast on energy, and that's all it actually needs. And so it's not actually trying to threaten the Doctor and co particularly. It is trying to destroy the ship though, because it wants all this energy. And so the problem, as some people said at the time, is the Pating looks too cute to be the most feared being in all the universe. It's sort of threat to life ultimate or something like that. It's the most deadly creature there's ever been. Like, when you design it to look like that, it's just kind of hard to take it seriously, I think. So I definitely agree that that's not ideal. I don't think Pating is bad. I think it was just kind of, I think the actual CGI of it looks pretty good. But they just talked it up as something that it wasn't particularly, or you just couldn't take it seriously for what they were calling it up to be, I think, which is one of the fundamental problems of this story when the threat just isn't there. Now, part of this lends into what we saw in a lot of Series 11, where the stories were a lot more character-focused rather than focusing on the plots of on telling great stories, which I think was probably, in the Moffat era generally, there was more focus on the plots than really, not they didn't develop the characters, but then really focusing in purely on character development between the different companions and the Doctor and things like that, which is something that we saw a lot more of in the Chibnall era so far, but I think has sometimes been to the detriment of the stories themselves, maybe. Because in terms of character development, this story, apart from Yaz, is actually quite good. It certainly does good things for the Graham and Ryan relationship, as that's probably one of the strongest things about the whole of Series 11 was the development of the Graham and Ryan, the sort of story arc between them, with Ryan gradually coming to accept Graham as his granddad, even though he isn't, and how we see he's so against doing that at the start. But by the end of the series, he's obviously finally reached that point to be able to call him that, and the whole stuff about Ryan's dad as well, which is explored a little bit in here when we see Jos, the pregnant man, which is played a little bit for laughs, but also has some more serious sides to it, where it gives sort of Ryan, when Jos says he wants to give up the baby and doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to look after the baby and everything, and sort of makes Ryan realise actually that that's not how a father should be, and the father should be wanting to sort of look after their child, and he kind of imparts that onto Jos. So I thought that from that point of view, there is some depth in this story, there is some character development. It depends to an extent how much you care about the characters as to how much you're going to really enjoy or invest into that part of the story, but it certainly is written in there pretty well. And I think that is definitely one of Chris's more stronger points as a writer in terms of telling those character stories and just developing those relationships, which I was, sort of pleasantly surprised to be reminded of actually watching this story, that although overall it's not great, there is some good character moments in there. Obviously, there's no doubt that Yaz has nothing to do in this story. She is nigh on non-existent, like she has no impact on the plot whatsoever, and yes, that's been an identified problem for a long time and is very clear again in this episode, which is a shame, but she kind of gets a bit more to do in the Demons of the Punjab, which I'll cover in a minute as well. And as a story overall, it's got a few main characters in there. The sort of people on the med ship, the kind of doctors and nurses, as it were, and also the other patients in there and things. And some of them are good, some of them are average. The pregnant man, as I say, is played a little bit too much for laughs maybe than it should be. To be able to then take seriously the development of the characters and all that, it's a mix that just doesn't work that well. It's not awful, but it doesn't work that well, and I think by this point in the series we kind of would get to the point where we'd expect to see more experimental and exciting and interesting stories than a very bog standard base under siege story, which is unfortunately what the Suranga Conundrum is. So moving past that one now, that average middle of the series episode, we get Demons of the Punjab, which for me is a much stronger story. It's a sign of what Series 11 did best in terms of telling properly kind of heartfelt, emotional, interesting and sort of really good teaching in terms of historical stories. This and Rosa in particular, and to an extent the Witchfinders, but probably not quite as much as these two. Really trying to tell an interesting historical story. One that for me, I didn't actually know that much about, the partition of India. I just had never really learned that at school or had any real information into that in the past. Obviously Rosa Parks, I had a little bit more, but it was quite nice to kind of tackle a slightly less well-known story, and being able to involve Yaz's family history in that. It is retreading some of the same ground that we've seen in stories like Father's Day, where she wants to go back and meet her gran and try and understand what's going on, and then suddenly realises that her gran isn't marrying the right person, and then they want to stick around, and she wants to interfere, and it all just gets quite complicated, kind of classic companion going back in time to see their family style that, as I say, we've seen in Father's Day in the past among other stories. But I don't think there's anything wrong with retreading that ground. Father's Day was 14 years ago, or 13 years ago when this story aired, so it's not like every Doctor Who story, well, not every, but most Doctor Who stories or storylines have been kind of repeated at some point in the past. So I don't have many major problems with them doing that, and I think that it's such a really well told story. I think it really takes the subject matter seriously in terms of the partition of India and the impact it's having on these different people who are in Pakistan and India, on the sides they're on in terms of Muslim versus Hindu as well, and just the sort of political time there. Not in a, I don't feel that it's in a sort of over the top, we're trying to be too PC way. I think it's just portraying and telling the political story of the time, and sort of really being willing to be realistic and honest about what it was like, not just trying to have a very on the surface, not really any depth to the kind of history of it, rather than just having a fun story. That wasn't what this story was about. It was about telling something historically accurate, but also really bringing some emotion into this story, I think. Obviously the villain, well, ultimately not the villain of the piece, were the Thijarians, who we thought were the ultimate killer race that were just killing people for some reason, and then obviously we found out that actually they changed their plan and that they were now there to kind of witness people's deaths, basically. When they're on their own, about to die, they'll come and sit with them and be their witness to see them die, and sort of, I don't really understand that getting uploaded into a database type thing, but I don't really know. But I thought that was... It does continue the trend of weak villains in Series 11, because, there is hardly any good villains in Series 11. I won't try and deny that. And this obviously continues that trend. Maybe this story ultimately would have worked better without a villain at all, given that it was much more about telling the historical story and the whole thing about Yaz's nan, and the clash between, I can't even remember the bloke's name, who was going to marry Yaz's nan and then gets killed because, by his brother, who's so politically motivated in the other way that he just can't accept that marriage between Muslim and Hindu. And just, I feel like that's the story that this is more about. It's not really about the monster or the alien, which is the same thing I said about Rosa as well. And I think it's probably to an extent the kind of limitations, or the feeling of limitations of Doctor Who, that they have to have some sort of monster in there. I've talked about The Woman Who Lived, which had that problem as well, back in Series 9. It's a problem that's there that I think back in the 60s you could get away with it with pure historicals, but then once they moved away from that as a trope, I think it's nigh on impossible to do a Doctor Who story that doesn't have some sort of alien threat in it at all. It needs to just have something in there to just meet the Doctor Who standard, as it were, I think, and not just being a period drama, which, apart from the alien, it really is, and I think it does such a good job of it. It's nice that Yaz does get a little bit more to do, being more involved in the base storyline of this episode, looking back in her delving back to her family history. I think that's all really, really effective stuff done there. It's probably the best use of Yaz in the series when she doesn't really get much else to do in a lot of the other episodes, which is a shame. But it's nice, to see this explored in this story, and I think it just, the ending when we see the guy getting killed, it's just such a sort of powerful and kind of heartbreaking moment. The way the music's done, I love the sort of Punjabi style music that they've composed, especially for this story. Sega Nakanoda, I think, probably did his best job of the series on this particular episode in really bringing out the feel of the period and the feel of the place that it's set in. It's so well, and just the sort of intensity of the music, the build up, and then the kind of moment of almost silence as he gets shot, and then the sort of really ominous and sounding sort of moody music after that. I think it just, you really feel it sort of tugging on the heartstrings, but in such a powerful and well crafted, not an artificial way, but a really well crafted and successful way, I think. Which is hats to Vinay Patel, who, of course, this is his first Doctor Who story he's ever written. I believe he's written a story for Series 12 as well, which I'm really excited to see what that's going to be all about. But yeah, this one I think he really shows straight away he just gets Doctor Who as a programme. So yes, Demons of the Punjab is definitely a really successful story, probably one of my favourites of the series. They're up there with Rosa and probably Kablam to come as well, which we'll be talking about later on. But up to this point, I'd say you haven't watched the first 6 episodes. This is very much on a par with Rosa as the 2 best stories so far. And yes, it kind of feels like Series 11 up until episode 6 at least is a very mixed bag of episodes where you've got Demons of the Punjab and Rosa very good, then you've got Woman Who Fell to Earth, which is pretty good, and then Ghost Monument okay, Errant in the UK not great, the Suranga Conundrum really not great. But there's maybe nothing all-time classic in there, but I think Rosa and Demons of the Punjab are pushing pretty close to that point, and just telling sort of stories that we maybe wouldn't have seen in past eras of Doctor Who. So I think that's really interesting and exciting to explore. So yes, that just about sums up Demons of the Punjab, one of the more very strong episodes of Series 11, I think it's fair to say. But that covers us off for these next 2 episodes for this video. I'll be back again in the next couple of weeks or so, hopefully, to look over Kablam and the Witchfinders, episodes 7 and 8 of the series, which hopefully will be quite interesting ones to have another watch of and just have a little breakdown of again. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the Suranga Conundrum and Demons of the Punjab that we've had a look at today. And as I say, I'll be back again then to look at those next 2 episodes. So as always, don't forget to hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll be back again for those videos. See you very soon. Bye bye.